just watched The Joker, and three movies come to mind. Taxi Driver being the first. Taxi Driver, angry white guy, working class, downtrodden, goes after a rich politician, tries to assassinate. I don't know, I don't remember if he's successful or not. And the movie ends with he saves the life of a prostitute, which, if you're familiar with Nazi mythology, Horst Wessel, which the national anthem of Nazi German is the Horst Wessel song. Horst Wessel was supposed to have been a Nazi who saved a young girl from prostitution and then was shot by a communist. That's the national anthem of Nazi Germany, is about a man who saves a prostitute. So Taxi Driver is this sort of, I don't know, extreme right-wing neo-Nazi people are attracted to Taxi Driver. I'm not sure they make the connection. I'm not sure the producers or the directors or the screenwriters made that connection, but there is a connection there. The next one is Fight Club. So Fight Club is about this kind of lower middle class, working class drone, cubicle dude who discovers an alternate life. He discovers a crazy life. He descends into mental illness, violence, chaos, and at the end of the movie, he sees all this come to fruition. He sees the skyscrapers falling, and in the movie, I don't know about the book, but in the movie he holds hands with this love interest and he's united with the woman. So both of these, Taxi Driver, he saves the prostitute. Fight Club, he holds hands with the girl. So there's a kind of unity between male and female. There's a creative aspect to it. And the third film is Falling Down. And Falling Down I haven't actually watched. But this is another one that right-wing people, when you ask, racists on the internet, what are your top three movies? These are the kind of movies that come up again and again. There might be other violent movies about masculinity like Rambo or Arnold Schwarzenegger, Conan the Barbarian, those sort of things, Terminator, whatever. They'll say like the 1980s were a great time for white male masculinity. But when you look at the movies they identify with and they feel epitomize their situation, their mental state, it's something like Taxi Driver, it's something like Fight Club, and it's also something like Falling Down. Now, Falling Down is a little bit different because it's about a man who is a boomer. He is a man who is well established, he's lived his life, he's older now, he has gray hair. I think it's Michael Douglas who plays the protagonist. And, he looks like an ex-military guy or something, a Joe Schmo. And I think he's divorced and his wife won't let him see his kids or something. I don't remember. I've only read summaries. I haven't actually watched the movie. But ultimately, he gets more and more increasingly violent. He's fighting gangs. He's fighting minorities. There's a brief, neo-Nazi appearance, and maybe he kills the neo-Nazi. I don't know. Let's add on a fourth one. This is not a movie, but this is the Netflix series Breaking Bad. So again, this stands out. Breaking Bad is a really beloved show, not just by far-right people, but by, I think, pretty much everyone. Again, it's about a white guy. He's been shafted. His Nobel Prize has been stolen from him by people who happen to be from Brooklyn. That as we find out at the end of the, spoiler alert, the people who steal his Nobel Prize, they happen to be very affluent people from Brooklyn. So there is this there's a lot of German names, Heisenberg. One of the main characters is kind of like a Hispanic version of a German name. It's like Waldo or something, where like Walt is a very German name, meaning forest. And I forget what the main, it's like Ronaldo or Waldo or something like this. He's actually like an Afro-Latino or something. It's really weird. Oh, Gustavo Fring. So Fring is a German name. Gustav is a German name, and they've kind of Latinoized it. But there's some interesting things going on there. And yeah, Breaking Bad is about a guy who, he's a loser, and his life takes a turn for a worse, and he ends up kind of reshaping the society around him and becoming a king of the underworld. And this is what The Joker is about, right? So The Joker is the fifth installment of this long line. I'm sure there are many others I'm forgetting to mention, many smaller movies, TV shows, whatever. I'm sure this is a recurring theme. I'm sure this, we could tie this back to Beowulf, the lone hero. He's a lonely hero. Or, we could talk about Aeneas, when Aeneas descends into the underworld and he has to conquer the underworld in order to speak with his father. He's trying to find his father. He's trying to find then his masculinity. He's trying to find his kingship. He's trying to find his patriarchy. He's trying to find his hierarchy. He's trying to discover authority because the overworld doesn't make sense. Troy has fallen. He's had to flee to Carthage. He's had to flee Carthage to Italy. And he doesn't know what's up. So he makes some stops along the way. I think, where is it? Where's the Cumaean Sibyl? I'm kind of forgetting some of the places he stops along the way. But we could say this is a very long line of lonely Western heroes. And as our good friend John David Ebert says, the Western mythos and the Western canon has the loneliest heroes that you will ever find of any culture anywhere on the face of the planet. This is what distinguishes the Northern European mythos from the rest of the world. Now, you know, he says that, and then I'm, of course, telling you how the Aeneid is an early example of this. So, you know, what does that make Ebert? Does that make him a Nordicist, or is he ignoring Aeneas, you know, when he refers to the myths of Babylon as the genesis of this concept of Marduk as the lone hero fighting against the dragon, which he calls a prototypical Northern European myth. Maybe he doesn't describe it as such, but when he describes the tradition, the Northern European tradition, he always draws it back to Babylon. So is he a Nordicist in that respect? Or what's going on there? We don't know what's going on there, but that's something John David Ebert would say. So clearly there's a huge tradition we're looking at. But I guess the Joker is significant, and it hits hard because it is culturally relevant. It is set in the 1980s, but clearly there's something about the Joker which addresses the current state of affairs, rather than you watch Falling Down and you have distance, or you watch Taxi Driver, you have distance. You say, okay, things were gritty in the past. Yes, the 1990s had a high crime rate. You know, you look at Fight Club and you're like, oh, that could never happen. No one, you know, that's just crazy. It's experimental, whatever. But the Joker hits close to home because it is so culturally relevant. We've already had a mass shooting, so I don't know what's going to happen. We'll see what happens. It is the anniversary, funny enough, or it was yesterday, the anniversary, I forget, of the Las Vegas shooting, who no one knows what happened. It's a complete mystery. It's like flying saucers and Area 51 and all of that good stuff. It's just a complete mystery. No one will ever know. But that is what is gripping the public consciousness. Mass shootings, global warming to an extent. I guess if we want to analyze Joker beyond just saying it's derivative of, you know, previous films and previous myths, we could say that Thomas Wayne is kind of a Trump figure. I don't endorse the message of the Joker. I don't think people should really watch it, especially not really in the theaters. I had the pleasure of getting like multicultural comic relief. I say that ironically. I had people of different strokes, we'll say, sitting next to me, laughing inappropriately, being grossed out. You know, he's crying and snot's coming out of his nose, and they're like, "Ew, that's gross." So I got to listen to those kind of comments. So I wouldn't I mean, and a whole host of it. There were trailers for like the new movie about Nazi Germany, which, when you see the joyful Hitler, who's actually a New Zealander, he's like a half Maori, half Jewish actor, director, whatever, show business guy, and he's dressed up in whiteface as Hitler, and you're watching that, and you think, oh, this is kind of funny, this is kind of comical, this is kind of taboo breaking, this is kind of interesting. Obviously, the dude, it's not a pro-Nazi message, but you look at that and he's like, oh, he's making fun of Hitler. If you've watched or read reviews for the German film Erst wieder da, it's a film about, oh, what if Hitler came back, you know, from the past, and he got transported to the future and he was plopped into modern day Germany, what would it be like? And it's a kind of funny movie, and it was controversial because it's like, no, Hitler's too serious, you can't make fun of Hitler. So I saw trailers initially for this movie, which I forget what it's called. It's like Rabbit Man or Goodbye Rabbit. It has nothing to do with it. You'd think it would be like My Friend Hitler. It's not called that. It's like My Friend Rabbit or something weird. And I watched the trailers. I thought it was interesting, and then I saw this longer trailer where it's depicting children in Nazi Germany as, first of all, they're fat, which just you didn't have fat kids in the Hitler Youth. You know, people imagine that, oh, well, people come in all shapes and sizes. Some people are just born fat. I mean, there might be some medical conditions out there where people, you know, might be obese. It's not really possible. It's not really possible. You literally just eat less food or burn more calories and you will not be fat. Especially children. Children are growing. They're going through puberty. It is impossible to be a fat child unless you are on an American diet, living an American lifestyle, which is now a global diet, global lifestyle. But this was not possible in 1930s Germany. So I know, oh, you're getting autistic. You're looking at the details. It's just, it's not just that. It's not just that the main character has a fat friend. Maybe that's not the most important aspect. But it's, again, I was thinking of watching the movie, and then I see this where it's the Battle of Berlin, essentially. The Soviets are invading. They're raping German women. And you've got the fat friend. He accidentally shoots like a bazooka or anti-tank weapon into a building and, you know, possibly killing some people. And this is like a comedic moment. And I don't know. You know, I guess everyone has their limits of humor, right? Everyone has their limits of dark comedy and things like that. And I don't know, child soldiers in the Battle of Berlin in the background. You know, they don't show this in the movie or the trailer, but, you know, the German women, German children are being raped by just, you know, random guys out of Kazakhstan or wherever they're getting these reserve troops from. And, you know, not their fault. I mean, rape as a weapon of war has always existed throughout history, so nothing, no particular anti-Russian sentiment for me, but it's a very bad scene, and I just kind of turned me off there, and that kind of spoiled my mood for the rest of the movie after the trailers. So that's a little bit of a digression. But yeah, so Thomas Wayne is kind of like a Donald Trump figure, and the message of the movie is like, it's basically middle finger to Trump. Like, Trump is the problem. Thomas Wayne is the problem. We don't care enough about broken people. We don't care enough about the mentally ill. And we need more money for them programs, is essentially the message of the movie. If only Arthur could have got more money and more medications and more antipsychotics, which, you know, all these mass shooters are found taking antipsychotics, but whatever. If only he had been allowed to take his antipsychotics. If only he had more therapy sessions with those kind black women, which it's like the amount of black women he interacts with in the movie is pretty statistically significant, if you ask me. I don't know what the message there is, but I don't know. Black women are overrepresented because of affirmative action. Is that the message of the movie? I don't know. Certainly overrepresented in these like social service government, you know, like, oh, we got a crazy white guy and the law says you have to give him therapy. Oh, sure, throw a black woman at the task. I'm sure she will surely listen and understand it, surely sympathize with this white man who she's probably like, which I got, by the way, as we're watching these trailers. The other trailer was it was called 1917. It's a World War I movie, and it's showing the perspective of British soldiers in World War I and the trials and the tribulations, and it's a whole tragedy. And there's this black woman, and she's like, is these Nazis, they look like not, and the black boyfriend's trying to explain to her, no, baby, that's World War I. They ain't not. Nazis didn't even exist yet. He's a little bit woke, you know, and she's like, well, they giving a Nazi vibe to me, and it's like, yeah, any white man is a Nazi, you know. It doesn't matter that they were literally fighting. First of all, Nazis didn't exist yet, but they were the British fighting the Germans, and she's like, I'm getting a Nazi vibe, and then, you know, you're getting right after that the Waikiki. Whitey Tighty, I don't know what these New Zealander Maori names are. You know, the Maori who slaughtered the indigenous tribes living in the area to take over the area, and then they're like, oh my god, we're being colonized. So, Yeah, I mean, this is what's going on. I have to unpack. I have to release. I have to let go. This is you right now. You are my black therapist, okay? And you're listening to me, and this is my programs. See, I'm not asking for money from the government. I'm just asking for YouTube viewership. I'm just asking you to listen and nod your head and go, mm-hmm, and maybe take a little notes here and there. So, to get back to it, we're watching this movie, and Thomas Wayne is Donald Trump, and the message is you should embrace being a low class white person. You should embrace being mentally ill. You should embrace being a mob rule. You should embrace all of this stuff. So, it's essentially like a campaign ad of the Democratic Party to attract lower class white voters. That's essentially what the movie was for me. Um, and it's this fantasy of the mob, the fantasy of Occupy Wall Street, the fantasy of revolution without patronage, which doesn't exist, right? It doesn't exist. So there's a whole lot of performatism in the movie, a whole lot of performance. Joaquin Phoenix. I thought he's a better Joker than Heath Ledger. I watched the Heath Ledger performance, and I guess that was the first time someone saw a serious Joker after, like, Jack Nicholson. People just kind of expect the Joker to be a joke, right? To be a funny guy, to be a cheesy Hollywood villain. And Heath Ledger was the first to even attempt to do it in a serious way. And so people worship the ground he walks on, and he killed himself, so that makes it like a holy Hollywood movie. And I thought Joaquin Phoenix was better. Not to say it was a perfect presentation. He had a very effeminate voice. There was definitely Freudian stuff going on, with the mother. It was weird, but it was intended to be weird. The character development, I don't know. I heard some criticisms of the film before I even watched it saying that, well, it would have been nice to see the Joker develop a kind of a cunning, a kind of intelligence, a kind of ability to organize. Because he never moves out of this childhood stage. Throughout the movie, I guess the Jordan Peterson analysis is he's Peter Pan. He never wants to grow up. This is a kid who is he's an adult man, right? But he's kind of going into this teenage rebellious phase. His whole life, he's been a good boy. He's been a good boy. He does what his mom tells him to do. He's been beaten by mom's girlfriend. He's been abused. He's been neglected. But he doesn't make a peep, and he doesn't make a sound. And he doesn't hurt people. And he's even ashamed to laugh, right? He's ashamed of everything, right? So he is this little boy. And then the end of the movie is he's finally reached teenage rebellion. That's the progression arc, that's the maturation arc of the movie. He never moves into being an adult. He never moves into, here is a man who's capable of organizing. Here is a man who's capable of exerting his will. Here's a man with agency. Here's a man who is Machiavellian. Here's a man who has a purpose, a telos, a goal. You never see that. You just see this teenage rebellion. And that kind of myth, if you want to ask, why is Hollywood promoting this? This is clearly, this is like a white nationalist movie, which you've had some people say, both on the left and the right. But you've got both people on both sides saying, like, this is a racist, this is promoting the gang known as incel, whatever. Why would Hollywood, what purpose does Hollywood have in putting out, what propaganda purpose does this serve? And I would just say it's the same old idea of revolution from below. If you just act crazy enough, you get mad enough, you can have a revolution. You and your friends, you can go out and start a revolution. And this is the mythos of democracy. It's the mythos of democracy that we see in the left wing with Occupy Wall Street. We see it in the right wing with things like the Tea Party movement or the Trump movement. And it's this concept of the authentic grassroots. There's no such thing as a grassroots movement. Every single movement throughout history is astroturfed in the sense that every single movement requires patronage, intelligence, hierarchy. You always have someone at the top, whether it is the French Revolution. And what I've heard from Chris Bond recently, and he introduced an interesting fact to me, which is the idea that the centralization of monarchs is what allowed for the toppling of monarchy in Europe. The monarchs hoarded power for themselves, and so they divested the local aristocracy of their power. And when the peasants rebelled, the aristocracy had no ability to put them down because all power was centralized in the monarchy. So it was not an anti-fragile system. For a long time, the Holy Roman Empire had been fairly anti-fragile because if there's a rebellion in one area, it doesn't affect the other areas. It's decentralized. It is a localized aristocracy with a symbolic emperor. The emperor didn't have much central power. When the Spanish Empire and then the French Empire begin to centralize everything around a monarch, this absolute monarchy, this Asiatic despotism, this is when the government becomes fragile because there's a single man. If you kill that man, then you destroy the whole system. Whereas previously, the aristocracy was extremely resilient, down to the local parish, down to the local level, the street level. And the aristocrats were all willing, and you see this in opera, as you get into the 18th century or even the 17th century, you see these operas performed where it talks about the aristocrats, a war has come, so the aristocrats are forced to go off to war, and there's some drama that ensues. Così fan tutte is about this, where you have two aristocrats who are engaged, and there's a phony war. I think they cook up some phony war in order to make their fiancés believe they're leaving, and then they swap fiancés with Albanian disguises and test the faithfulness of their fiancés. In the end, they end up wife swapping. So it's I guess a degenerate tale that this was the media, this was the consumption of the upper class, the aristocracy. They were into, what today would be considered like Modern Family tier or Ellen DeGeneres tier or whatever. That was the entertainment of the aristocracy, which has been filtering down to the masses for, it's taken hundreds of years, but we've gotten there. At that time, the aristocracy would say, this is not really fit for the masses. The masses wouldn't understand this, or they should be going to church or something. They're not enlightened. They can't safely consume this kind of a media. Of course, lower classes have been entertaining themselves with all kind of crude and vulgar things throughout time. Punch and Judy, Shakespeare was accessible to the masses. You do get a Victorian backlash, which is like this realization of, oh, we're kind of headed in a bad direction. And that's where you get this Victorian puritanical backlash of the idea. Maybe we need to tighten up morality because something is slipping. We're losing something. We're losing some form of control here. So there's a Victorian backlash against this kind of, 17th, 18th century libertine attitudes that you see in reaction to, I guess, the destruction of the Catholic Church in Northern Europe and this new Protestantism, which is always on shaky foundation and is always questionable as a new religion. So I'm really getting off the beaten path here because it's going to be time to end this video pretty soon. But the interesting thing Chris Bond brought up was in his interview with Joel Davis was just that the French Revolution was made possible because of the centralization of power in these absolute monarchies, which was not the traditional form of monarchy. The traditional form of monarchy is that the monarch is the first among equals. He is not the only power in the country. He is the most powerful aristocrat, but he is not the only aristocrat. And it is only through the centralization of monarchies that we can have a fragility present in which democracy, republicanism can enter the stage, which we know is not. It is always a hypocrisy. It is always a false democracy. It is never a true democracy. It is the illusion of democracy. And so who comes to power in the French Revolution is not the people. It is the merchant class. It is, in the case of the Napoleonic Wars, which are basically the French Revolution, that process of devolving the monarchy, bringing it into a period of chaos. What comes out of that is Napoleonic, what some would refer to as a Napoleonic fascism. It is a fusion of a populist element with a traditionalist monarchist element. which of course Evola criticized, but that's the essential nature of fascism, is that it buys in to some extent to the notion of populism and democracy, but at the same time it fuses that with a kind of a traditional authoritarianism and monarchy. So you have a kind of Napoleonic fascism, and what ultimately happens is that Rothschild decides that Napoleonic fascism is not the way to go, and what ultimately comes about is Metternichian Europe. This treaty that's devised by Metternich in Austria, and he decides this new world order for Europe as it expands and colonizes the world, very similar to what we have after World War II. This period of peace, this period of increasing unity, multinational trade, globalism, this is all stuff we've seen before. We're just continuing, we're in that second phase of it, in that sphere of the cycle, that period of the cycle. So we were talking about the Joker, weren't we? Right. And that's the main takeaway from the Joker. The Joker promotes the concept of democracy. You know, kill Thomas Wayne and become part of the mob. Well, what the Joker doesn't tell you is that's a lie, and that the mob is always controlled. The mob is always directed. The mob does not have internal agency. It is always a tool to be used by those who do have agency and do have power. So it is the enemies of Thomas Wayne who control the mob. Now, do we sympathize with Thomas Wayne? There's another interesting scene in the movie where Thomas Wayne and all his rich, and the scene mostly, there's like one black woman in the back. Most of these guys are just white men. And they're laughing at Charlie Chaplin, which is weird because even in the 1980s, I never found Charlie Chaplin. I never found the Three Stooges to be funny. I never found Charlie Chaplin to be funny. I just don't get it. I don't get that slapstick humor. But they're all laughing at Charlie Chaplin. And so there's this huge Charlie Chaplin poster outside the theater where they're watching this. And it's like Charlie Chaplin is who they worship, who they see as a good, safe comedian. The Joker's dangerous, but Charlie Chaplin is the guy they prefer. So there's a kind of a marriage between Charlie Chaplin and Thomas Wayne. And these guys are on the same team. And I guess that is the situation of the upper class where there is a confusing, a very Fight Club-esque element in the story. There's multiple of those hallucinations that Arthur has. But one of them is this idea that Thomas Wayne is his father. Now, if Thomas Wayne represents the king of Europe, he represents the monarch, the head aristocrat, we could say Thomas Wayne is the current instantiation of Charlemagne, in the same way that every Egyptian king was supposed to be the incarnation of Ra, the sun god. You can say that Thomas Wayne is Charlemagne. And since Charlemagne sired all of the kings of Europe, who then spread out into Bulgaria, North Africa, into Rus, through the Vikings, and so on and so forth, if we say that Charlemagne is the father of all the aristocracy, and if we follow Ryan Falk's argument that the aristocracy is the father of all of Europe, because through their enormous fertility and the lack of nutrition for the lower classes, eventually the aristocracy completely replaced the lower classes. And therefore, all Europeans are sons and daughters of Charlemagne through this genealogical process. If that is the case, then there is a sense in which the Charlemagne which Thomas Wayne represents is truly the father of all European peoples, even the janitors, even the mentally ill, even the poor. And in a sense, Thomas Wayne is genealogically connected and closer to someone like Arthur Fleck than he is to Charlie Chaplin, right? Charlie Chaplin, who might understand his aristocratic sensibilities. Maybe they hobnob, they get together, they're cosmopolitan, they speak multiple languages, they have lots of money. So Thomas Wayne, he might feel more connected with Charlie Chaplin. He might feel that's a better fit, or Murray Finkelstein, who's the entertainer. Murray, I think I'm messing it up here. I think it's not Murray Finkelstein. It's Murray Franklin, right? Murray Franklin is this other guy who's a big defender. He's the media man. He's the defender of Thomas Wayne. He has a handler as well, who's called Gene. So Murray Franklin is a manipulator, but he's also manipulated by his handler, essentially, his agent, whatever you call it, Gene. So there's multiple levels of manipulation, and there's this network where you can see, maybe Thomas Wayne is like an aristocrat. But he is on the same team with Murray Franklin. He's on the same team with Charlie Chaplin. He laughs with these people. This is the kind of people he likes. They understand him. This is the aristocratic supremacist idea of someone like Kalergi, who says, the Japanese aristocracy and the European aristocracy and the Jewish aristocracy, they are of the same mind. They are of the same spirit. And they have more in common than they do with any of the lower classes, the Asiatic lower classes, the African lower classes, the European lower classes. All of those people are the masses. Those are the democratic masses. Really, it is the elites of the world who are truly of a kindred race, truly of a kindred spirit. And that is what you find among the elite. You find this attitude growing with globalization. And that is their attitude. I guess you can disagree with them. You can argue against that. You should say no. And this is kind of the position of Arthur. He's like, no, I am your son. I am your son. And he's saying, no, you're crazy, that you're adopted, you're this, you're that, your mother's crazy. But what the audience sees, I think, and what Arthur sees through what the audience sees through Arthur's eyes is, no, Thomas, he really is your son. He's your son in the sense that you are both related. You do kind of look the same, right? You may be in very different positions in life, but you are connected in a way. And he just punches him in the face, and he walks away. And he goes, watches more Charlie Chaplin. And that's kind of the story of the elite, right? They like Charlie Chaplin. They sympathize with him. They like that guy. He's their guy. He is the guy who appeals to them in their sensibility, and they could care less for the lower classes. So that is their perspective, and it's not one you can really argue with. It just is. I don't think you're going to be able to convince them otherwise, and I think that will only continue to be more and more true. And Arthur's upset about this, and the message of the movie is that if you feel like Arthur, then what you should do is you should kill Thomas Wayne, and you should form a mob, and this mob will make you free. Which is not true. Killing Thomas Wayne, killing Donald Trump, you might not like these people. You might not like the fact that they don't like you and you're not. But killing them is not going to free you from them. It's simply going to put you in the hands and the control of those who pretend to be liberators. Liberators. We know about liberators. We know Hitler promised to liberate Germany. Does that make him a liberator? Does a promise of liberation equal liberation? We can ask that of the Nazis, we can ask that of the communists. A promise of liberation does not equal liberation. And Joker, the silver lining of Joker, or the, like I said, Taxi Driver, he saves the prostitute. I don't know what happens at the end of Falling Down. Fight Club, he holds hand with his love interest. I don't know what the good... I guess Breaking Bad, he kills all the Nazis. That's the triumphant ending. What is the triumphant ending of Joker? It is the rise of the mob, the rise of the Occupy Wall Street movement, which elects Obama. Obama, who continues the foreign wars. Obama, who doesn't close Guantanamo Bay. Obama, who authorizes drone strikes on American civilians. Obama, who continues all of the Patriot Act, NSA spying of George W. Bush. I was just telling someone the other day about the Alien and Sedition Acts, and then I looked, and they're still in the books. It is still illegal to criticize, what the Sedition Act says, it says it is illegal to criticize the federal government using falsehoods, which is a pretty incredible breach of what we consider to be freedom of speech. Because then if you say something like, the federal government, they're all lizards or something, I don't know, anything that you'd say wrong, technically, if the sedition law is still active, it's never been repealed, then, and this is like 1798 or something it was passed, then technically you could go to jail, right? Which is an interesting precedent that's never been stricken from the books. It's an interesting history there. We might have to do a deep dive into that at some point. Probably not, because who cares, right? But that sort of history is interesting. I promise we're getting to the end of this. Yeah, it doesn't work. Mob rule doesn't work. It doesn't get you anywhere. It just puts you in the hands of someone who claims to be a liberator. You're being manipulated behind the scenes. You're not getting closer to Thomas. You're not overthrowing Thomas. In a sense, Thomas, he is what he is. He's never going to love you. He's never going to give you a hug. As, again, here Arthur represents the audience. The audience wants a hug. The audience wants a hug from the elite. The audience wants daddy. That's what people want. People want a paternalistic father to hug them. And unfortunately, as a society, we see less and less of that. I don't know. I guess everyone can have their own level of self-pity about that. But it is, I think, something that is a source of suffering for a lot of people. Just in general, even people who have a father figure, the father figure might be distant, the father figure might be aloof, the father figure might be effeminate, he might be inadequate as a father figure and can't fulfill that role. I mean, imagine a world in which people are looking at Jordan Peterson as a father figure, and you see how screwed up people are. You know, this effeminate guy who is, sounds like Kermit, and he just checked into rehab. And you look at his wife, and you look at his daughter, and you're like, I don't know what's going on with this guy. But he's the father figure of so many millions of men. And then you start to realize, wait a second. If millions of men are saying, I didn't have a father figure, and then I met Jordan Peterson, might have a problem. Might have a problem. Might be a wake-up call there. So maybe you can, and I hear this from the resident militant vegan. You know who you are. Resident militant vegan will say things like, you know, white people have it pretty good. It's not that bad. And by certain metrics, certainly rich white people have never had it better. Rich white people, their economic growth has increased. Rich white people are living it up. But I don't think poor white people are having a great time. And I think if you're not in touch with poor white people and you don't know what's going on, or you're not even looking at the statistics, then I guess you can ignore that, but it is true that just the situation, divorce rates, everything that's going on is it's pretty bad. It's pretty psychologically jarring. But just joining a mob it's not gonna fix the problem there. Getting in street fights, Charlottesville-esque street fights. I remember before Charlottesville, you had the Battle of Berkeley, and all of the people who claim to be. Later, they sort of retconned Charlottesville, and they said, I was always against Charlottesville. I never encouraged that. As if Charlottesville was a single event. There were so many violent street fights that came before Charlottesville, including the Battle of Berkeley, which got so much positive coverage, irresponsibly, from Ezra Levant, you know, from Rebel Media, from, you know, these kind of alt-light, you know, milquetoast sort of people were covering the Battle of Berkeley positively. And so many people were hopping aboard that train irresponsibly. Oh yeah, the power of the mob, we're going to get out in the streets, we're going to beat people up. And thinking that that is itself a source of power rather than a show of power. And people can't get this correlation versus causation thing correct. They think that, well, because, you know, Antifa fights in the streets, and Antifa is in power. Therefore, if we fight in the streets, we'll be in power. That's not how power works. Antifa is an expression of power. Antifa is not a source of power. The elites do not rely upon Antifa. Antifa is a symptom. They are the hall monitors of society who see power, they identify with power, and they want to be on the side of power. And that is why they join Antifa. Now, of course, the mythology of our society is that the powerful are the powerless, and the powerless are the powerful, and it's a very much The term Chris Boyd uses is Juvenalian, which again, I don't understand. If someone can explain to me, can we get some neo-absolutists in the comments? Can we get someone who actually understands neo-absolutism to explain Juvenal and who Juvenal is? Do I have to Google this? Do I have to do my Googles? Can I even do my Googles? Can I even Juvenal? Juvenal? Juvenal ist der Name folgender Personen. Warum ist alles Deutsch? Weiß nicht. Paul Juvenal der Ältere war ein Nürnberger Maler. He's a painter. That has nothing to do... Why? I'm just so confused. Nicholas Juvenal, glass painter. Neo-absolutism. Sorry, I have to do. If the name Juvenal is not just a complete mystification. All right, tell me about this. Tell me about who is Juvenal? If I read a poem by Juvenal, do I have a scenic relation to an ancient Roman? My Juvenal and a first century Roman. So is Juvenal, oh my goodness, is this guy a Roman? A Roman poet. He wrote the satires. Juvenal. Juvenal. So tell me, the satires. Juvenalian. Modern criticism. Its wrathful scorn toward representatives of social deviance. Some politically progressive scholars have attempted to defend his work as that of a persona taken to critique the attitudes he appears to be exhibiting. So, Juvenal's satire is giving several accounts of Jewish life, early Judaism. I still don't understand the connection between Juvenal and Blue Empire tactics. Juvenalian is like a good adjective. Like, I feel like I know what it means when people use juvenile and Juvenalian. I just don't understand, like, I can't teach this to people at this point. I have no clue what's going on. So I still don't understand what's going on. I'm sorry, guys. It's not a good morning. It's a tired morning. I've said all about I have to say about the Joker, the ups, the downs, mostly the downs. It's a downer. It's a big downer of a movie. It's a demoralizer, and it says you should funnel all your negative energy into producing a mob, which is the least productive thing you could do. Don't have a Battle of Berkeley. Don't have a Charlottesville. Don't get in the streets. Don't get in street fights. This is what the movie is telling people to do. It's telling people, oh, if you're on the left wing, go join Occupy Wall Street 2.0, whatever that's going to look like. Of course, it's going to be called something different. It's called the climate protest, guys. It's called the Me Too movement. They're always going to come up with a new label to slap on this old, tired story, which is a distraction, which is a vampiric parasitism that is sucking out your soul and manipulating it and playing with you like a puppet. And they'll do it on the left wing. They'll have, the Tea Party 2.0, which became Charlottesville, which is a disaster. And it's going to become something else in the future. This cycle isn't going to end because they keep pumping the mythology and people still keep swallowing it and internalizing it and believing it to be true. It's not true. If you want power, you have to gain patronage. And you have to basically say, look, Thomas, I know you don't love me, Thomas Wayne. I know you don't love me. I know you don't want me. You're not going to give me a hug. And rather than throwing a fit, rather than having a teenage rebellion, I'm going to bend the knee. I'm going to say, all right, Thomas, you are better than the alternative. You are better than the deceivers who want to create a mob and chaos and rule by chaos and rule by deception. You, Thomas, you're honest. You look at the poor people and you say, I don't like these people. And you know what, Thomas? That's your right. That's who you are. You have the power and ability to abuse the little guy. But please don't abuse us too much. that is really all you can say. You are either born into power or you are born out of power. And there is very, very little movement. There's very little social mobility in actuality. We live in a time of decreasing social mobility. And so social mobility is not something which is as fluid as it's sold. The American dream, you can start off as an immigrant, penniless immigrant, like the Statue of Liberty says, give me your poor, your tired, your homeless, your wretched masses washed up on the shores, and they're going to make a few dollars here, make a few dollars there, invest a few here, start their business there, become a millionaire and a billionaire, and become the president of the United States. That is the mythos that's sold to us, and it's not true. That kind of social mobility doesn't really happen, and oftentimes you get regression to the mean, or you get assimilation, where someone actually will rise through the ranks, and they're not going to rock the boat. They're just going to join the establishment. And so the ethnic, moral core, whatever you want to call it, the rules that govern the establishment don't change. The interests don't change. Some people filter in, some people filter out, but the core doesn't change. And that means that you can't change things from the outside. And if you can't change things from the outside, then you have to appeal to the people who already are there. But certainly don't join the mob. And joining the mob is what they want you to do. That is the message of the Joker. I don't know how emphatic I can be about this point. I will never be able to make enough YouTube videos to outweigh the message of the mainstream, of Hollywood, in their propaganda about join the mob, join the mob. That's what they want you to do. That's what they've been wanting you to do since the French Revolution. It's what they've been telling you to do, and people still fall for it. It doesn't matter how many times they do it and then pull a switcheroo, and they're like, oh, sorry, now we're, have a dictatorship. Oh, sorry, now we have mass famine. Oh, sorry, now we have the Holodomor. No matter how many times they pull the switcheroo, people don't learn, because people only have access to the information they're fed. I actually really liked the portrayal of Arthur's mother, who she says, Thomas is a really nice guy. And of course, again, I'm kind of defending Thomas here. But she says, so Thomas is a really nice guy. And Arthur says, Mom, how do you know that? Who do you talk to? You're in the apartment all day. You never leave the apartment. And she says, well, all the people on the TV say he's a really nice guy. And that is the mentality of 99.9%. That's the mentality of pretty much everyone except those who are actually in power, and then a very small percentage of people who don't really change things either way. Is, the TV says this, therefore I'll believe it. So that's where we are. There's no need to go Joker mode, I guess, is what I've been trying to say since Brenton Tarrant. I've been trying to stress this to people. Going Joker mode isn't going to help. It's not going to change anything. It's going to feed into, they want Brenton Tarrants, they want Jokers, they want these people because they rule through chaos. They rule through the appearance of chaos. You think you're a free agent. You think you're going off and you're doing something crazy and against the system, and you're playing into their hands, which is really sad, the way people can be so easily controlled by their passions, by their anger, by their childish rebellion, their teenage rebellion. They understand psychology down to a T, and they're using it, and most people are victimized by this. So there's a victimary message. I think that's something that Franklin says, Murray Franklin. He says, Arthur, you seem to pity yourself a whole lot, which is true. I mean, it's absolutely true. Not to say that we don't pity Arthur when we see him being beaten by what looks in the first scene by like a gang of Latinos, and then he's attacked by what looks like a gang of alcoholic stockbrokers or something. We sympathize with him and we pity him, but ultimately that pity is not going to get us anywhere. Certainly, if we're going to direct it toward like some kind of mob activity, it's not going to get us anywhere. It's not going to work. This is a serious video. This is a very serious. I guess it's a serious. I had people, I had a diverse cast of characters alongside me in the theater, laughing at inappropriate times, voicing their opinion. Um, and I guess maybe that soured some of the experience for me. It was a sour experience. I don't really recommend seeing the movie. Um, it's very insidious. It's very insidious. It draws you in, and it tries to make you, oh, we sympathize with you. We know what's going on. We're your friends. Join the mob. Get out in the streets. Go burn some cars. That's what you should do with your time, right? So it's very interesting. We could talk about this for hours, right? But we got to stop it here. So thanks for listening. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.